This is the lab video for the titration lab, and in this lab we are going to be determining the concentration of an acid. And I have a bunch of the equipment out that you will need. You'll need a squirt bottle with deionized water. For us, what we're going to do is have a known concentration of sodium hydroxide. Now this bottle is 0.501 molar. Your bottle might vary a little bit, but we'll know the concentration of this one. You are going to have an unknown, it's hydrochloric acid at some unknown molarity, and this is what we are calculating in the lab. This is the point of doing this lab. You're going to need an indicator. For this one we are using phenolphthalein, and we're going to use burettes. Now we have not used burettes before, so I want to talk a little bit about this. You have the Burette Clamp, and the way the clamp works is you want to squeeze these two parts down, and when you put the burette in there, make sure those pieces, those two arms there, are fully engaged, because sometimes they get a little stuck. So sometimes I just push lightly on that just to make sure it's held in there, because you don't want to let go without doing that, because the burette will fall down and the tip will end up breaking. When we work with burettes, one of them will have the acid and one will have the base. Now this clamp, some people cross some stuff out, but for this one we're going to have the acid on the left and the base on the right. You can have it any way you want, but you definitely want to know which one is which. And a lot of times these clamps are labeled already, so I just kind of go with how the clamps are. Usually it's the acid on the left and the base on the right, so that's what we'll go with. We're going to use a 125 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask, a funnel for when we have to fill up the burettes, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then I have a card here with a black line on it. The reason why I have this, when the burette is filled with liquid, it will help you read the number on there. Now this burette, the numbers are written in a dark color, and that really helps. When you're using the burettes, they're a little different than a graduated cylinder. This is usually what we've been using to measure volume. And you notice with a graduated cylinder, the numbers get larger as you move up. And that is because you pour the liquid out the top of the graduated cylinder. Now, the burettes are different. You notice you start out with 0 at the top, and as you move down, the numbers get bigger. The reason for that is because the liquid is going to come out the bottom. We have a valve here and a stem. Now, what that means, when you're reading the numbers off of the burette, you're going to go by the meniscus like always, but say it's between 10 and 11, the numbers are going to get bigger as you go down. So that's different than what you've done before. So when you're reading burettes the first time, a lot of times you just have to look at it for an extra couple seconds just to get your bearing straight on how you're doing it. Now, if you're lucky, you might have a magnetic stir plate with a stir bar in the Erlenmeyer flask. Our labs usually don't have that, but some labs might. All right, what goes on with the burette, what I want to go over real quick first is how you clean a burette and how do you get it ready to use. You might get lucky and they might be filled up already, but they might not. Now, the burettes, if you don't know what they've been used for first, you're going to want to clean them with deionized water. And what I tend to do is I tend to squirt down the stem at the bottom, and I also squirt it from the top, but I rotate the burette. So now it's going down all around that inside, and now I have a bunch of liquid in here. Parallel, the liquid comes out. When it's perpendicular, it is closed. Now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pour some out the top. So I close the valve so the water's not spraying out all over, and I turn it upside down, and I open the valve, and I twist it while it's doing that. Now at this point, this is rinsed out with deionized water. I do not want to pour my acid solution into this and start titrating right away, because if I pour acid into here, there's some residual deionized water, and that's going to lower the molarity of my acid. So what you want to do is rinse out this burette with the acid now. And this is where the funnel might come in handy. Now for me, I feel like I'm tall enough where I can rinse this out pretty well without pouring. You don't want to pour above your head, because if anything splashes, it's going to go in your face. I'm going to get a little more of this liquid out. So what I did is lower the burette all the way down. Now make sure it doesn't hit the tabletop. You're going to break the burette tip. So if you have to, one of the things you could do is bring the burette all the way over to the side and lower it down, so now you can pour it safely without pouring above your head. You want to put the funnel into there. Now the other thing is, if you don't know if this funnel is clean or not, I would actually spray this out with some deionized water too and shake it to get as much of the water out as you can. Alright, add that in the top. Take the acid. You're not going to have to pour a whole lot of it in there. You just want to pour some. Alright, something like that should be fine. Now I'm going to lift this back up. Set it back in place. Now I want to keep this clean. So what I'm going to do at first is rinse out any residual water that might be in that funnel. And I'm just using the beaker to hold it so I don't get any acid on my hands. So now when I do this, the only thing that's in here is acid. So when I add more acid in here, I don't have to worry about lowering the molarity. I ran acid through the tip, so that got rid of any deionized water in there. And now, with this closed, because you don't want the acid shooting out of the stem, you can pour it upside down and pour it nice and slow and rotate it while you do it. And that gets rid of any deionized water or diluted acid. So now this burette is ready to use. I can now put the funnel back in it, fill it up with the unknown acid, and I don't have to worry about lowering the molarity of the acid. I would then do the same thing for the base. Rinse it out with DI water, run it through the stem, pour it out the top, use a different funnel, rinse it all out, clean it up, and then fill it up with base. Remember to rinse it with base before you end up doing the titration. Again, you don't want to lower the molarity of the base. And then at this point, we should be able to get ready to do the titration now that these things are all cleaned out and ready to be filled up. When you are filling these, one of the things I wanted to point out is there's options for funnels. And if you have one where this stem is a little wider, it might be a little difficult because if that's pushed down on it, it forms a really tight seal and the liquid won't actually flow down. So you might have to lift it up a little bit. Or a better option is if you have a thinner stem, just use that one because then it will fill it up. When you fill these up, don't feel like you have to get all the way up to the zero. There's no point to do that. It would just be a waste of time. You definitely don't want it above zero. You just want it on there somewhere because we're just going to read the initial volume anyway. And with this burette where it has dark numbers, it helps if you have a white card behind it. And notice the numbers increase as you go down and you estimate one place past what you know. So what you could do is get this black line and line it up right on there. So when I'm looking at that, I would say that looks maybe about 11.42. It looks like it's just past 11.4. I'll say 11.42. Now for the NaOH, and for this example, these letters are in white. So I feel like having a white card behind it doesn't help at all. I think it actually makes it worse. So if you put something that's a little darker for a little contrast, so I feel like having my hand behind it works better. So for this, it looks like it's between 8 and 9. When I was looking at this, I was thinking maybe around 8.80 or something like that. Write that down in the initial burette reading, 8.0A, 8.80. So now we're ready to actually do the titration. Now, if you're lucky, your class might have magnetic stirrers and you can put a magnetic stir bar in here. I'll just show you how to do it without that. We're going to start with the acid for our case. Now, when you do this, when you open this valve, when it's parallel, the liquid's actually going to move down pretty quick. You want to get about 10 milliliters of the acid in there. Don't worry if you're a little over or under because we're just going to measure it anyway. So I'm at about 11.42, so I'm going to bring this down to about 21.42. And you can see how fast the liquid will move down. All right, it goes pretty quick. Now, if you close the valve some, you can get it to come out slowly. And this is something that takes a little bit of practice, but you can get there with a little bit of practice. It'll work okay. All right, so that's about 10 milliliters. Now, I touched the tip of the stem to the Erlenmeyer flask to get that drop on there. Now, something that people forget sometimes, you have to add in the indicator. 2 drops will do it, and it should stay colorless at this point because phenolphthalein is colorless in an acid. And now we are ready to add the base. And when you add the base, you have to swirl it because you want the base and the acid to mix. Now I'm going to open this up, and as we add it, what you'll see is it helps to have a white paper underneath. And you can see you start to get a little bit of pink color. It might have been too too light for you to see on the film. But you start to get a little bit of a pink color, and you want to keep stirring it. And when it takes longer for the pink to go away, that's when you slow down. Right, so you don't want that open all the way. What you want to do is get this to the lightest pink color as you can get. And that actually looks pretty good. To be honest, I wasn't even that careful, and it's a very light color. Sometimes it might be really hard to get a very light pink color depending on what the molarity of the base is relative to the acid. Sometimes just adding one drop is enough to make it go to a very dark pink color. So once you have a nice light color that's not going away, you're done that titration. All you have to do now is record the numbers off of the burettes, doing the same thing as we did before. You're going to end up doing 3 titrations because we want to get the average of these. So if you're working with a partner, maybe let the other partner to do it for the second run, however you two want to do it. But both people should do at least 1 titration. Now, let's just say you're doing this and you go a little too fast, or you forget to close the valve the right way, and you end up making this a lot darker than it's supposed to be. This one's not going real dark. If it ends up being a lot darker than it's supposed to be, you can always go back to the acid and add a little bit of acid in to get it back to colorless, like just on the colorless side. And then you can go back to the base and get it nice light pink. You can do a little bit of back and forth if you want to. Now, if you do that, wait until you're completely done to read the volumes off the burette. And now when you're done the first run, you know that if you add 10 milliliters of this acid, you should have a pretty good idea, or whatever the volume was here, you should have a really good idea of what volume you need for the base. So for that first titration, you might go a little quicker. You might go kind of slow adding that base, but now for the second titration, you can add that base a little quicker until you get close to that endpoint, because you should have a pretty good idea of where the endpoint will be. You could just go a little fast, and then when you get close to it, you can start going dropwise. Now, some tricks you could do if you know you only need a drop. You can touch the tip to the stem to get that drop in there, because with the liquid, sometimes it sticks to it. Or if it's not coming down, you can always take some DI water and squirt the tip of that, and it will get that base in there. So if you only need 1 drop, there are 2 little tricks you can do. It doesn't matter if you add deionized water into this collection flask, because really what we're looking at is the moles of acid to the moles of base. So the amount of water isn't going to affect that. It's a moles to moles thing for acid to base. You're not actually changing the number of moles of each thing. You're diluting it overall, but it's still the same moles of acid to moles of base. But that is the general idea. Once you get 3 runs done, you are then able to calculate the molarity of the unknown acid, and you can average all 3 of them out. Now that you're done all 3 titrations, what you want to do is check with your teacher. Your teacher may want you to keep these filled up for the next class, or your teacher might want you to clean them out. If your teacher wants you to clean them out, what you want to do is keep the valve closed, and when you turn it upside down, so no liquid's coming out the back, you want to turn it upside down and then open the valve so it all runs out. And now, like we did at the beginning, you want to rinse it with DI water. So get it nice and clean, and then you put it back in the burette stand upside down so it airs out. If your teacher wants you to leave it filled, you might have to top off the acid and base. And if you do that, grab a funnel, make sure it's clean, and just fill it up. Remember, you don't want to pour high above your face. You want to lower it down like we showed earlier. And remember, you don't have to get it right to 0. Just anywhere below 0 would be fine. Just pay attention if your teacher wants you to do that. And also, after you're done a titration, make sure you have enough liquid to finish the next titration. So let's say, for example, for one titration, you went from, say, 1 milliliter all the way down to 40. Well, you're not going to have enough for a second titration. So before you start that, you're going to have to start over. You're going to have to refill it. So pay attention to that before you start any subsequent titrations. Make sure you have enough of the acid and base in the burette. You can't add it once you get started. You're not going to have accurate numbers in.